March is here and spring is on the horizon, and we're all looking for green. Green grass, green leaves, and even the lucky 4-leaf green clover. It's the month of green, especially for the Irish, thanks to St. Paddy's Day. Have you ever been pinched for not wearing green? Welcome to Summer Bakes the World. On this channel, we're baking traditional breads and dishes from all over the world with the added bonus of learning some history and baking tips. Today is all about the Irish. Well, that's not entirely true. While we give credit to Ireland for the invention of what we know of as Irish soda bread, we actually need to thank the Native Americans for this creation. They are the ones thought to have first used baking soda in baking bread in the late 1700s to make flatbreads, especially the fry bread. Sorry, Ireland, but we need to give credit where credit is due. However, we can give the Irish credit for making it popular around the world in its modern state. With my goal of baking the world using authentic recipes, the Irish soda bread we're baking today only has 4 ingredients. That's right, and is commonly eaten in Southern Ireland. However, I will tell you along the way to make it a little indulgent with modern mix-ins so you can modify it to your preferred tastes and desires. My American perspective is that when I think of Irish soda bread, I envision currants or raisins or dates, something dotted throughout, but this known in Ireland as the spotted dog. Reality is, traditional Irish soda bread is very plain. It became a regular on the Irish table during the mid-1800s. Since then, it has been eaten on a daily basis with its very simple, limited lack of preserving ingredients. It doesn't last long, and it usually is made every few days. The need for regular baking is the reason we don't see indulgent-filled ingredients. The modern Irish soda bread that many of us think of, well, at least those of us who aren't from Ireland, is referred to as cake in Ireland. It is more of a dessert bread and can contain dried fruit, eggs, and caraway seeds, among other ingredients, most notably in America for sugar, eggs, and butter. Why is baking soda such an important ingredient in this bread? It's so weird that one tiny, small, seemingly minor ingredient is in the name of the bread. You know, pondering that thought for a sec, I'm reminded that I tend to say yeast rolls when I talk about bread rolls, so I guess it's not that weird after all. Baking soda actually acts as a yeast alternative, providing that desirable lightness we expect in bread. The yeast-like texture is a result of the acid in the buttermilk reacting with the baking soda, causing a sort of breaking down, sort of like what yeast does with gluten when it pushes air between those fibers that result in a light bread. While we will be using American-made all-purpose flour for this recipe today, in my research, I have learned that all-purpose flour milled in Ireland tends to be a softer wheat. I imagine if we want this recipe to be a lighter soda bread, we should use instead pastry flour or cake flour. In fact, for those of you who live in the American South, where the coveted white lily flour is readily available in your supermarkets, my personal recommendation is to use that flour in this recipe since it is milled using a softer wheat than other all-purpose flours milled in the United States. But since I traded white lily flour climate for a colder climate with a lack of humidity, I'm going with a traditional all-purpose flour today since that is what is found in most homes. With that, let's look at the ingredients. Our 4 simple ingredients include all-purpose flour. Consider using white lily, pastry, or cake flour, salt, baking soda, and buttermilk. Whole is preferred, but very difficult to find, so we're using low-fat buttermilk today. What makes this bread unique is the lack of yeast, but rather the addition, or substitution if you will, of baking soda and buttermilk. Let's get this bake started. Since there's no yeast, there's no rising and very little kneading, meaning we have ourselves a quick bread. Therefore, let's go ahead and preheat our oven to 450 degrees. So in a large mixing bowl, we're going to whisk 4 cups of all-purpose flour. So remember, when you are putting flour into your measuring cup, you really want to scoop it out using a measuring spoon because we want to make sure it's nice and fluffy. If you do not, then you could end up adding as much as 1 to 2 tablespoons of extra flour in your recipe than you really need. Fill it past the top, then just take your utensil, whether it's a knife or a spoon, don't make a mess like I'm doing, and then just rake off the top there. So that's cup number 3, and then we're going here with cup number 4. And then to our 4 cups of flour, we're gonna add 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. 1, 2, 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. And then we're gonna add a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. 1/2 teaspoon isn't very much, so it's kind of ironic that it's called baking soda bread or soda bread. So just do a nice light whisk just to make sure all the ingredients are dispersed and well combined. Make sure that salt and baking soda moves throughout our dry ingredient here, our flour. Pretty simple, right? So all we have left is our wet ingredient, number 4. Okay, so for this recipe, you may need to add more than what we're gonna add right now. We're gonna start with 1 1/4 cups of buttermilk. Shake it up because it is nice, thick, creamy consistency. And then when you're measuring your liquids, be sure to put them on a flat surface so that you don't actually add any more than the necessary amount. All right, it's exactly 1 1/4 cup. Notice how easy that was because I poured out on a flat surface. Again, if you're holding it up and pouring it, then you're gonna likely not have a parallel surface and end up with more liquid than you really want. Okay, I'm gonna transition from my whisk here to a sturdy spoon. So whenever I pour wet ingredients into dry ingredients, I like to make a well in the center of my dry ingredients and just pour the wet in. Now this is a low-fat buttermilk, and I cannot find full-fat buttermilk in my stores. So this doesn't seem quite as thick as a full-fat buttermilk, but if you can use full-fat, it's great. If not, go with low-fat. The recipe will still turn out fine. Okay, so then we're just gonna stir well. After 1 1/4 cups of buttermilk, notice how dry my mixture looks. So we definitely need to add more. Normally I wouldn't measure this, I would just start pouring, but since I'm doing this for you, I kind of want to give you an idea of how much I'm pouring in. So I'm going to just put a 1/2 cup there and let's just see where it takes us. I'm not going to put all of it in for right now. So at this point, I really want to see what this feels like. So I'm going to move to my hands and start using my hands to knead instead of my spoon. And we're going to add some flour too, because I know we're going to need a little bit so that we don't get this all stuck to our hands. When you're making homemade bread, the best utensils you have are your hands. That's where you can really understand and feel the texture of the dough. And that will tell you exactly how much liquid and how much flour you need to add in order to make it the right consistency that you need, the right texture. Now notice here, I have some bits of flour that are still out. This tells me that I'm gonna need more buttermilk. All right, so I've used about 1/4 of that 1/2 that I put in. So I'm gonna add, you know what, I'm gonna add the rest of that 1/2 because I can always add in flour as I'm kneading it a little bit. All right, I think that I've got plenty of liquid in here. I'm gonna need to add a little bit more flour. So this is the point where you can add those mix-ins that I was mentioning earlier. So these are the things you can add. For a savory version, you can add 1/2 to 1 cup of shredded cheese, like a sharp Irish cheddar. That would be really good in this. Consider adding 1 to 2 teaspoons of dried herbs such as chives, rosemary, or thyme. Try mixing in a head of mashed roasted garlic or caramelized onions from 1 small onion. So for a lightly sweetened version, you could add in 1/2 cup of raisins, dried currants, chopped dates. Our oven timer just went off, so it's preheated. If nuts are your thing, you could add 1/2 to 1 cup of chopped nuts such as pistachios, walnuts. Why not add in some caraway seeds or shelled sunflower seeds? So since I'm making the authentic traditional version, I'm not adding any extra mix-ins to this. If you were gonna add your mix-ins, just put them in the bowl, mix it in with the dough, you're good to go, and then you go to this next step. Once everything has been mixed in, if the dough still seems too dry, this is at the point where you could add even more buttermilk if you need it. It's gonna depend on your climate. If you live in a dry climate, you may need as much as 2 cups total of buttermilk. For me, I do live in dry climate. I didn't have any other mix-ins, and I ended up adding 1 3/4 cup of buttermilk to this dough. I'm not able to get a good knead in my bowl, so I'm just gonna knead mine on a flat surface just to make sure everything is carefully mixed, but at the same time, we don't wanna overwork this dough because we are not developing any gluten in this dough. We just want a nice mix, that's it. All right, so I'm gonna get my floured surface that I like to knead on. And again, I don't wanna put much flour in here because we're not doing much kneading at all. I just wanna make sure that my dough has a nice, smooth consistency to it. And if you had mix-ins, you probably would want to do this as well. And it's meant to be a bit of a rustic sort of a sticky dough here. All right, I think I'm feeling pretty good about this dough. Even though this is my first time making this recipe, I follow directions, so I think we're in good shape. While our dough is resting just for a bit, we need to prepare our baking surface. So I'm gonna bake my bread on just a round cookie sheet. You can use any surface that you want. And then I'm just gonna line it with parchment paper just to keep it from sticking. You could use a Dutch oven or a skillet. I think skillet's traditional here as well. So whatever you have will be fine as long as it's large enough surface that this can rise and move around. So now we're gonna transfer it to our parchment paper. The traditional loaf of this size needs to be patted out to about 1.5 inches in thickness. So I'm just gonna pat mine out just a little bit more. Keep it in that circular shape here. All right, it's about 1.5 inches. I'm happy with that. This is what it looks like. The last step in preparing our dough is to score the top. So you need to flour your knife a bit. And we're just gonna do a crisscross pattern. So I'm gonna go that one side and then turn it around and do another crisscross pattern. Okay, and the purpose of the pattern is to allow space for the dough to rise from the inside out. But the Irish legend goes that the crisscross shape is meant to let the devil out as the bread bakes. But the cross is also significant to put on bread around Christmas time because it also represents the religious cross. And the reason why the crisscross also works is because, since notice this is a relatively small loaf, that this automatically divides it up, so it's perfect sharing for 4 people. So if you have a family of 4, you each have your own quarter of a bread, right? Something else they do with this bread is they put a slit into each of the quadrants here. I never did really find out why. Probably to allow steam to escape and allow it to space to grow. That's my educated guess here. All right, and then this is it. Now it's ready to go in the oven for 15 minutes. If you were baking this for your family every few days, notice how easy this would be. There's no waiting time. There's hardly any kneading. It's just a matter of mixing it together, mixing it well, throw it in the oven, bake it, and you have a great bread. So 15 minutes, and then we'll see what it looks like. It's been 15 minutes. Now it's time to turn down the oven to 400 degrees. I'm not gonna open my oven because I don't want the heat to escape, but turn your oven down now to 400 degrees and then bake 25 minutes. See you in 25. So our 25 minutes are up, but we still have one last step. So we're gonna take the bread out very quickly. Notice how pretty it is. We're gonna flip it over. We're gonna put it back in the oven for 5 minutes. So set your timer for 5 minutes and let it go. The timer just went off for that last 5 minutes with the bread turned upside down. So let's take it out and take a quick look. I'm not gonna turn my oven off yet. All right, so notice it's crusty looking, top and bottom. 2 ways you can check to see if it's done. You can use your fingertips. If it sounds hollow, looks golden brown and crusty, it's done. Or I will use my fail-safe method, which is to put my thermometer in it. The internal temperature should be 190 degrees, and we know that's completely done on the inside. If it's not, I'm going to put it back in the oven. We're there. So my thermometer says 200 degrees. So we're done. So that was 15 minutes on 450 degrees, 25 minutes at 400 degrees, another 5 minutes with it turned upside down. Notice how pretty it is. Simple bread. So what does that tell us? That our Irish soda bread is done. It is best eaten hot right out of the oven. So let's dig in. Without further ado, let's break into this rustic, simple looking loaf. So since it's already divided for us into 4 sharing pieces, I'm gonna cut out 1 chunk of it. Oh, notice the steam coming out of it. That's a nice, pretty white loaf. Simple white loaf of bread, 4 ingredients. Okay, notice that it rose really well. It's got a nice little crumb to it, nice little hard exterior. So if you were eating en famille, then you could divide this into 4 pieces and give each of your family members a huge chunk. That's a lot of bread to eat. Or you could slice it up like this. Just slice it into smaller, thinner slices. And then if you could, of course, serve it in chunks and pieces like this. So it's actually a nice slice instead of a big chunk. That would be up to you. All right, so let's break it apart. Yeah, you can see it feels a little bit damp to me. It's definitely dense, and I know that's from the lack of yeast, but it has some height to it from the baking soda with the acid in the buttermilk. Let's give it a try. Since gluten is an issue for me, Scott is joining us today to give us his expert opinion on the taste of this bread. Thanks for joining us, Scott.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so if you wouldn't mind, take a bite of this traditional Irish soda bread. It's very rustic. It's something that is baked on a regular basis and eaten with the meal. So while you're thinking about the bread and tasting it, let me give you a quick rundown. This bread only has 4 ingredients: flour, salt, baking soda, and buttermilk, hence the name Irish soda bread. Without yeast, the acid in the buttermilk reacts with the baking soda to create a chemical reaction like yeast would in a regular bread. While most Americans have eaten and think of this bread with dried fruits like currants and raisins, the authentic Irish version is not that at all. It's a simple 4-ingredient version. Now that you've had a chance to eat it, this is something that would be served with a traditional Irish meal. What are your thoughts on the taste of the bread?
I like the hard exterior, very crunchy on the outside, but very soft on the inside. Reminds me of a giant biscuit.
How cool of a comparison. You know, when I was making this bread, it didn't even occur to me that it has ingredients similar to a biscuit. That's actually a really good, as I'm looking at it and when I was touching it, when I was showing the texture, it seemed like it, now that you say that, a biscuit is probably what I would compare it to. But flavor-wise, it tastes like a biscuit.
Yeah, you can tell it has a limited number of ingredients. Very simple, basic, clean. I like fewer ingredients. How long would it last in a cupboard? Or
just a couple days, like a biscuit. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's so fresh and so preservative-free.
Yeah.
How would you compare this texture to a regular bread, maybe?
A yeast bread?
Uh-huh.
So it's denser,
okay.
It's rich, it tastes richer. I guess I can taste the buttermilk in it.
That's probably what it is, since that's actually the only fat that's in it.
Yeah, so it's not a sandwich bread. But yeah, as a side bread, I could certainly see that.
Okay. All right. Well, you know, I used a typical all-purpose American flour here, but if you wanted a lighter bread, try cake flour or pastry flour. And like I said, you could use the white lily if you live in the South. But Irish all-purpose flour typically is with a softer wheat. So this, I haven't had the Irish version exactly, so I don't know how to compare as far as density is concerned, but this is like a biscuit. I think that's a fair comparison. Imagine eating a slice of this simple, versatile bread slathered with some Irish salted butter and or served alongside corned beef and cabbage. Now that's an Irish meal perfect for St. Patty's Day, don't you think?
Do we have corned beef and cabbage?
Nope.
Okay.
We have sauerkraut. Good enough.
But we have the bread.
Then we have the bread. That's all that matters, right?
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. I appreciate your support. If you haven't already, subscribe to my channel and share my videos with your family and friends. Wear some green, look for a 4-leaf clover or a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow, and expand your horizons by trying a new recipe. Until next time, go bake the world. Have you ever looked for a 4-leaf clover?
Yeah, when I was a kid. And I've never found one. Well, I found a lot of 3-leaf clovers that the fourth leaf obviously was accidentally pulled off.
Right. Well, I remember in elementary school, do you know where my parents' window is outside the house? They would have all these clovers that would grow underneath their window, and I remember standing right under that window and just picking through it going, okay, there has to be a 4-leaf, there has to be a 4-leaf. I spent so much wasted time doing that.
I was good at finding 3-leaf clovers.
Yeah, everybody.
Too bad that's not a thing.
I know, too bad that's not a thing, right? All right, well, cool. Thanks.